Hi, my name's Bob Greenyer, and I'm a volunteer with the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project. So, welcome this 10th of September 2023 to O-Day, HHO. Can everyone hear me? Hi, Gordon Doherty, Tucker Trice, Terran Art Eston, yes, Cosmic Dave Rhetorical, Artifact, Corky Goss, D2105K. Excellent. We have a good quorum in the house. Hi, David Boutier and Stuart N. Glass Chappie Rhetorical and Goit Tosan. Starfish Troopers Podcast and Rare Condition. Hi, Creating Awareness and Accept. Excellent. Lovely. So, a few things have come out of the presentation and extended presentation I gave for ICCF 25. The first time that I had an opportunity to share my thoughts about what the MFMP had done over the last 11 years with the cold fusion, ACA, low-energy nuclear reaction community. And one of those was I had a fairly lengthy phone call with Malcolm Bendel on Zoom. I didn't sign any NDAs. That's not going to happen. And with their current assessment organization, which is based out of North Carolina, read into that what you will. And a chap in Hawaii made the connection. So thank you to Richard for that. And it was a good couple of hours. And it was very, very stimulating. And from my point of view, I said straight up, the most important thing is, does it work and is it safe? Does it work and is it safe? And I'm not overly fussed what is going on with a particular technology. Certainly from a viewer's or user's viewpoint, it shouldn't be something that they need to concern themselves with, but safety is. So, whilst a lot of claimants in the field that I have donated a chunk of my life to have been very keen to stress they don't see any normal kind of radiation, well, I think we're aware that there might be something else going on and maybe going in, and those are the things that I would like to see properly assessed and potentially mitigated for. So from my point of view, they seem to be open. If that is the case, whatever, I want to ensure that they are, how should we put this? Safely testing, properly assessing anything that might be taken into the reactor from the local environment and things that might be ejected from the reactor. But what I can say was I was sent a video which may or may not be public. I actually don't know. I think it is public. But anyway, it was of a thunderstorm generator's sphere. This sort of departure from the GEAT, one of the departures from the GEAT type technology. And there were, in my view, 100% certainly exotic vacuum objects leaving this thunderstorm generator sphere. Therefore, in my view, with the evidence that's been presented to me without my ability to test it firsthand, in this case where apparently it was overdriven, it was clearly involving charge clusters, ACA, EVOs, ACA, magnetotoroelectrical clusters, and or radiation. These are the ones that are visible, and we know that these things can actually act in dark mode. This was observed by Tesla in the 1890s, and that we need to consider that not seeing them doesn't mean there isn't things coming out. And the way they are formed, as I've discussed a number of times in the past, may involve a event horizon that actually extracts things and captures it into the device. And for these two reasons, proper precautions should be taken, both in investigation and potentially in final use. Anyway, so excellent to have Slobodan Stankovic, a seasoned HHO researcher, with us this evening. Thank you for joining us. And Stuart N., great to have you here also. So this actually might be a short presentation. I'm sure you're glad to hear that. The purpose of this presentation was to give you some of my thoughts about why I believe fundamentally HHO is so active. And it stems from understanding that potentially the driving force is this magnetotoroelectrical clusters, these exotic vacuum objects, which have these absolutely incredibly intense magnetic fields. We know from our own work that these structures are well below often the size of the ones that were supposed to have 1.36 thousand Tesla when they were only single pulsed with a laser. If they are resonantly created, one could imagine that that would build and build and build and build. And of course, the intensity of the magnetic field is dependent on the diameter, and that is something that was discussed by one of the people I had a video for in the long form. It was meant to be in the short form, but in the long form presentation of the practical applications of the fractal toroidal moment, and that was John Archibald Wheeler. And so the smaller these things get, the more intense the magnetic field and the gravitational azimuth that binds it all together. And obviously when they are beyond the basics, they also have what would appear to be a gravitational loop, and loops within loops, loop-de-loop of gravitational loopiness. And this leads to a gravitational collapse, as observed by and claimed by Solin and Matsumoto and Sviatomenko, and implied by what was said by John Archibald Wheeler. And so what you're looking for is something that can be influenced by a magnetic field and hopefully add to it rather than take away from it. And I hope that my short discussion tonight on HHO will help you align your thinking maybe with my thinking. I would like you to be very critical of it. I may have made mistakes. It is true that I often make mistakes. And for the good of humanity, we need to get this right, and we need to get this right fast. So there we are. That is that. Now, what you are seeing here on this screen is a propeller, or impeller, one might say, propeller, from a large ship, maybe even a cruise ship. And I took this video, which I will include the actual video clip on the blog later in this coming week. This was actually on the San Francisco Pacific side when I first visited San Francisco, after spending some time doing experiments with Alan Goldwater. I went there for a day and a half as a break between experiments, and you can see the cavitation effect here on the blades of the propeller and these scalloped sections. And I think we have a better understanding of why they form in the scallops, and the scallops themselves create the environment for further scalloping. So and cavitation. So it's an accelerating process that goes on. Of course, this being mild steel is actually less likely to transmute. I discussed that with HHO cutting through very thick steel in my ICCF 25 presentation. But that doesn't mean it cannot be damaged. But what we are going to talk about more is taking the example of synthesis of iron, which is one of the most observed LENR phenomena. And with that, we take our fractal structure and the magnetic fields that I've been discussing with it. And that's at one scale, but if you remember in Game Over, I referred to these two blobs, this being the colorized image of data of a black hole at the center of our galaxy. And I asked what this was, and I actually revealed, after some humorous discussion, that it was in fact the colorized image of a subsegment of a toroidal cluster that was found in the breakup of a ball lightning, in fact the ball lightning or one of the ball lightnings in the Henk-Uren-Vega Valley experiment. Okay, so, you know, this is what they see, this is what we produce, and the colorized source for that was this one here, this bit here. Okay, which I also showed in my ICCF 25 presentation. So these are the subsegments here. So those are the three segments which I colorized here. And there we go. That looks like that. So we're saying that something creates a gravitational azimuth, according to John Archibald Wheeler. And I'm arguing that that is a phase singularity, and things are pulled into that. And certainly that would qualify as something that would have the action of a black hole. And so John Archibald Wheeler says it creates a black hole. A black hole looks like it, and this is our analog. So there we have it. Now, the data that I want to focus on is actually really almost the start of my journey with looking at ball lightning and subjects surrounding it. And that was this image here, which I've shown a number of times, of the George Ohsawa cycle. Now, who is George Ohsawa? I think in the 70s, he came up with a macrobiotic diet. And one of his experiments was this whole carbon arc underwater experiment where he claimed the synthesis to a large degree of iron. In fact, he patented, and because the iron had specific properties, it seemed to be, I think it was like corrosion resistant and you know, strong or whatever. They actually wanted to make a commercial product of this thing. And then later on, when one of the world's greatest electrochemists, John Bockris, and a personal friend and colleague of Martin Fleischmann, tried to replicate this in 1994 at Texas A&M, he concluded that the carbon from the rod, 2C12, and the oxygen potentially synthesized but certainly present in oxygen, two of those went to produce 56 iron and 2 helium. Now, right from the beginning of this, I had the CNO cycle on it here, CNO. And if you start with carbon and you add a proton, and you have this process which goes on in stars, and if we're to believe Lutz Jaitner, the magnetic pressure in the center of what he calls condensed plasmoid, which is an EVO, can reach 5 times the magnetic pressure of the center of the sun, the same as a pulsar, a form of neutron star. And one might imagine that what goes on in the sun might also occur in an EVO, so you might start with carbon and end up with production of oxygen, or not. But Do we really need that? Anyway, so I discussed this in my presentation, I think at the beginning of 2017, was it? At the launch of the Stanford University's Energy Club. And that was invited by the good Sir Carl Page. So he's not actually a sir, but I mean, like in the sort of reference phrase. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look now at this paper, and we're going to read a couple of extracts from it, which I think are important for context. So let me just pull that up. So here it is, and this was replicated by Quantum Rabbit and some other people, but this was when the American Nuclear Society was fairly favourable to innovative research, and one of those areas of research were discharges underwater, because this is what Matsumoto was doing, this is what Tadahiko Mizuno was doing, and you know, that's great that they were at the American Nuclear Society very keen to see this sort of thing. And in a large part, that's because of this character here, one George Miley, and this is from volume 26 of Fusion Technology, November 1994. It says, the following two technical notes: anomalous reactions during arcing between carbon rods in water and verification of George Ossawa experiment for anomalous production of iron from carbon arc in water are unique among the various papers that have been published in fusion technology in the area of cold fusion and nuclear reactions in solids. The first discusses experiments intended to prove or disprove earlier reports of anomalous production of iron in a carbon arc, while the second discusses a variety of possible related nuclear transmutations. Both studies are directly or indirectly related to the subject of nuclear reactions under not hot plasma conditions, i.e. closely related to the field of possible nuclear reactions in electrodes during electrolysis in materials like palladium with deuterium implanted by high gas pressure plasmas or electrical discharges. Both studies imply that reactions might occur under electron volt background conditions that are even further removed from hot plasma reaction conditions than those encountered in electrolytic cells. However, even in electrolytic cells, there have been sporadic reports of the measurement of various product elements that imply nuclear transmutations can occur under these conditions. And it refers to these various authors here. Sadly, it does not refer to those specific ones by Takaaki Matsumoto in palladium, deuterated palladium, where he observed these transmutations. By anyone's standard, these results seem bizarre. Indeed, the authors themselves stress the need for much more work. Because of this, 4 referees with widely varying backgrounds were used to review each of these technical notes. The decision to publish came down to the fact that the references were mostly neutral in their assessment, saying that they could find no egregious errors, but that the studies were not definitive and hence may be premature. Still, based on the responsibility for a journal to disseminate information to the community in a timely way so that further work is fostered or that pertinent issues are raised, the majority recommendation was to publish these technical notes now. Readers should keep in mind the purpose of these technical notes, namely to provide provocative observations about a possible new field involving fusion-like nuclear reactions. It is a great shame that George Miley's willingness to publish so-called provocative documents that cannot really be challenged on the basis of the observed phenomena was changed in 1994, and that restricted the work of, I believe, many authors, and I don't believe that this is necessarily George Miley's decision, the founder of the American Nuclear Society's Fusion Technology Journal. Okay. So, anomalous reactions during arcing between carbon rods in water. We won't read it all, but anyway, the arc current varied from 20 to 25 amps and was passed intermittently for several hours. The original carbon contained 2 parts per million ppm iron, and the detritus contained up to 286 parts per million of iron. The carbon rods remained cool to the touch at greater than 2 centimeters from their tips. Absorption of iron from water or surrounding atmosphere was established as not being the cause of the increased iron. There is a weak correlation between the iron formed and the time of passage of current. When dissolved oxygen was replaced by nitrogen in solution, no iron was formed. Hence, the mechanism is proposed as the one that I showed you on the previous slide. 2 carbon 12 plus 2 oxygen 18 goes to 56 iron plus helium 4. Okay, and that was suggested as the origin of the iron. The increase in temperature of the solution was consistent with expectation based on this reaction. Okay, so we won't need to go into all of this, but here is the schematic of the experiment. It's really rather simple. The key is to make sure your water state and contents and the carbon rod state and contents, and to be having the kind of quality of assessment of material that was going on. Now, where I'm going to depart from this is because of the diamagnetic nature of carbon, and that will become clear as we go on. But I just want to come down. You can look at this in your own time, and hopefully many of you have the efforts they went to. But essentially, what you need to know is in that initial abstract, and then we will look here. The formation of iron occurs only in the presence of oxygen. When the arcing was carried out in a nitrogen atmosphere, iron was not formed. An 18 oxygen isotope was considered because of mass balance. It's not certain, but they're saying because of mass balance, that's why they chose 18 oxygen. Now, one wonders if they are doing arcing. Well, one would imagine that there is going to be oxygen produced in the so-called electrolysis going on in that arcing process. Or is it just coming in a different form? Is it just being evolved? It's not dissolved in the water? Does it need to be dissolved at a certain level? What is going on? The scheme suggested for formation of the scheme suggests formation of alpha particles. The arcing therefore is not accompanied by neutrons or gamma radiations. Okay, so but I don't think they observed alpha particles. They don't. It wouldn't travel very far, but I don't think they looked for helium. Okay, so they're assuming that helium is formed, but they didn't necessarily look for that. Considering the various atomic masses, the reaction it favored as written, the mass defect amounts to an excess energy of about 56.55 MeV. The energy released by this reaction, as well as the Joule heating due to arcing, would raise the temperature of the water in the trough. The extent of this heating may be considered next. The average amount of iron formed over a 3-hour arcing experiment was of the order of 15 micrograms. This, according to the suggested reaction scheme, would be equivalent to the release based on the mass difference here, okay, in the reaction, would be equivalent to the release of an average energy, G, of 135.2 joules second, or a power of 135 watts. The Joule heating due to the electrical power input was calculated by taking into account the current and voltage during the running of the arc. Though the current to initiate the arc was 10 amps or more, it always fell to a lower value of approximately 5 amps while the arc was continuous. The electrical power input under these conditions would then be 50 watts. Now, they don't potentially look at, power factor, and I don't know whether they had some sort of power analyzer on there, but that's what they're saying, 50 watts. The combined power input due to the energy released in the suggested formation of iron and electrical power input in running the arc would thus be 185 watts. According to a separate experiment that showed an average temperature rise of 18 degrees C for a power input of 50 watts, I guess they might have looked at, I actually haven't read it all actually, they might have done a pure resistive heating. This would indicate that the temperature of the water in the trough would be raised by 67 degrees C and would reach 87 degrees C. In fact, the temperature of the water in the trough rose to 80 degrees C, not 87 degrees C. However, during the experiment, also the arc was kept running for only 20 to 30 minutes at a time, with a break of 15 to 20 minutes. So they're counting the total time that it ran for and the total input energy, and it should have reached 87 degrees C, but they weren't running it continuously. They did 20 to 30 minute runs, and then they took breaks of 15 to 20 minutes where one might imagine it would cool down. So in between, to avoid excessive heating. Thus, it appears as if the transformation of carbon to iron is possible under the experimental conditions described. Recently, Carabin et al. Showed that new nuclei were formed up to a concentration of 0.1% over a 1 micrometer thick layer of palladium cathode in a deuterium glow discharge experiment. That's like a corona discharge. It is, however, expected that the iron formed during arcing would be different from that found in nature, with a different isotopic distribution. This is a subject for further study. There we go. That's the further study bit. And there we go. And one of the authors, Sundaresan, thanks the Bubba Atomic Research Center for the ability of him to leave and work with the Texas A&M University. So this was a member of the Indian Nuclear Authority Main Research Center, BARC, and one of the world's greatest electrochemists working together. And that is what they found, that the heat was in line with what would be expected if this kind of mass difference had occurred with a sort of 56.55 MeV per reaction yield. Okay, so that is that. So I'm just going to go to visit the little boy's room. So I'm going to leave you with the George Osler cycle whilst I do that. And the thing down here, you might like to go to remoteview.icu and download the document and read around it for just a few minutes before I come back and we get into the meat of the argument here. as a programming note, I will be this coming week discussing some SEMs I took in March 2022 of a 360-second ultra experiment that I conducted in Prague, actually in the room with the SEM, and very quickly put the samples under the SEM. And in my view, with my analysis, I think it's just frankly astounding what I have to share on those. So look out for that in the coming week. So what is going on with HHO? Let's go and review some things that we discussed about this a couple of years ago in LENR in a Can. This presentation here. And we're going to dig a few slides out of here just to refresh our memories. So this was 8th of December 2021. This is actually the one that I gave to the Russian community. And we have, you know, a phenomenological basis here that oxygen here accounts for much of the element in the Earth's crust. It is necessary 100% to the way plants work and to the way animals work. It doesn't matter. Oxygen is there in both cases. It's absolutely critical. And so Langmuir in 1909, according to Chava Science here, they got excess energy from hydrogen, and I believe that this is what was identified by Tesla. This etheric matter comes out, but actually what is going on is when you do this intense over 5 electron volt discharge into hydrogen, you get this proper charge separation, and the magnetotor-electrical cluster comes out, the neutral cluster, which is, according to Shishkin potentially, and Carol's and stuff, it's this cluster of relic neutrinos that actually has energy within it. It's the hidden energy within matter, which is easiest to release from hydrogen isotopes, 2,000 to 4,000 times easier. And then when the bare proton and the electron, the free electron, reform an atomic hydrogen and go on to form H2. But when they're reforming the atomic hydrogen, they have to reassemble this toroidal cluster of relic neutrinos from the environment to make a valid atom. And so you get this extraordinary excess energy from splitting up hydrogen to proper charge dissociation and the reforming of the atom. And because these clusters can then go away and do work and may be absorbed in certain materials. And so we have a closing of this. Now, this has been discussed in a number of works. I referred to a book some time ago. I can't remember the name offhand, but they said something that was coming in from the ether, and this would be consistent with that. But Langmuir here says gas, and this is my thinking that HHO was involved. Gas releases from the tungsten filament in a couple of days were 7,000 times its own volume of gas of the actual filament, and there were a possibility that some of the gases came from water vapor from glass and the gases from the vacuum system. The water vapor molecules in contact with the hot filament produced a volatile oxide of tungsten, and the hydrogen was liberated in atomic form. And in atomic form, I would suggest that that would go on to produce charge clusters, and they would end up by doing what we observed when we applied a marsagast to tungsten, and it was fissioning, and one of the key products was xenon. They don't know what the gases are here, but there was 7 times its own volume, but it could even have been yielding protons and so forth. So that's one. There was decomposition here and claimed production of helium by Wendt and Irion. Okay. So Rutherford was unable to detect hydrogen from the bombardment with alpha rays of carbon, oxygen, magnesium, silicon, sulfur, whose weights blah, blah, blah. But there was this claim. I went over it before. We have HHO in this system. This was a tungsten one, but it's effectively Mizuno HHO. This is HHO. This is effectively exploding wire in there, and it produces these monopoles. Okay, and these are the exploded monopoles on an X-ray film. And these strange radiation, or what is called by Lucier condensed plasmoids, these are the exploded ones, but they are highly internally magnetic. They have a magnetic core in them. And this was discussed in this key paper about the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, about the runaway reaction by Filipov and Leonid Roitskev. And it's all to do with these, what they call Low-Shack monopoles. However, I can say that on Wednesday this coming week, Leonid Roitskev is going to do another presentation and tie in geo sort of manipulation with what occurred at Chernobyl. And I think it's going to be an extremely important presentation that I think everyone needs to listen to. But he introduced this paramagnetic bound state in this paper here. And so this was the first time that I had something that was a little bit more of an understanding of why oxygen was so important in the Sundaresan and Bockris work. It was clearly important. Why was it important? Okay, so these magnetic charges, according to them, the theory is that paramagnetic nuclei can capture magnetic charge. These are the blown up magnetic charge, okay? And these are the same thing as the stuff that is released from hydrogen. Bear that in mind, okay? And these fly around. So when you blow up a metal or you blow up something and release these things, these are zooming around, okay? They, so it might be that they need to get a certain distance before they're able to be bound to particular oxygen molecule or something else, which we'll discuss. And so if you don't have dissolved oxygen in your water when you're doing that Sundaresan and Bockris experiment, these things have nothing to bind to. The local oxygen that's produced and evolves at the actual electrode, one of the electrodes, it might just be lost to the environment. It's not in the water in such a state that it can absorb these clusters that are emitted from the electrolysis process or the discharge process going on. Okay, so a study of elemental composition of the post-accident fragments of graphite blocks from the fourth unit of the power plant. Considerable islets of aluminium, silicon, sodium, and uranium were found within the graphite depth, although it is well known that highly pure graphite is used in the reactors. So these highly brittle, ultra-pure graphite moderator blocks in an RBMK reactor, it's exactly how it works, were not damaged, but when they were cut open, they found these things that had teleported inside. How? So this would be a cluster that's captured this matter, transmuted it possibly from uranium. It's obviously carrying some uranium in there. A number of eyewitnesses, including the members of the government commission, have noted that the glow observed above the ruined reactor during the first days after the accident was unnaturally coloured. This fact can be easily explained within the framework of interaction of magnetic monopoles with excited atoms, which shifts the electronic levels of optical transitions, giving rise to a colour spectrum unusual for the human eye. And this, talked about here in this paper from 2006, matches the work of the team of Xu and Zhu in three-body alignments. You have neutrino clusters affecting oxygen spectral lines, and in their work you have, during an environment which they didn't know at the time, but obviously they had beta isotopes of rubidium-87 and cesium-137 changing in atomic clocks, and they are both beta isotopes, therefore it must be some sort of neutrino inverse process going on. Those are interacting and there's a different flux of them in a 3-body alignment, and that changes the atomic clock decay rate. And so you have an alignment of these two concepts going on, and what they observed is elements gave a different spectral output, which means their flux of interaction with the ether, the relic neutrino condensate, in my viewpoint, this coherent condensate, was altered, and so the electron promotion and return photons were giving a different spectrum, and this aligns with the later work of Leonid Oritskev and Filipov et al. However, theirs actually has a specific mechanism, but it is aligning. And again, with the synchrotron, I discussed this in several of my questions and tried to get the community to engage with this. You've got these monopoles, and when it comes out of a synchrotron with a magnet, you see monopoles for the same type joining here. When you get mixed ones, you get different types joining on their heads, because that's naturally where they would most easily align if they're just flying about. You've got two coming together here, two coming together here. Whereas in this side of a magnetic adjusted flux, you have ones coming up their own tail, if you know what I mean. So these are the structures. They form long-lived structures. We saw this before Bogdanovich showed his work. These are, I'm talking about Ken Shoulder's work. We don't need to go into that. And we talked about Matsumoto synthesizing carbon here and carbon ejection here from the pole. And very amazingly, it was also found that later by the ring products consist of conventional elements. Okay, carbon, and he also talks about oxygen and iron. That's what he talks about: carbon, oxygen, and iron. That's within his introduction. Okay, so I don't know whether there's anything necessary to add on this. Maybe. Oh yeah, well, there's sort of the tungsten transmutation going on, the stuff that got caught in the filament. Okay, and there's your magnetic intensity in there, and I don't know, there's lots more. You can go and have a look at that LENR in a can. Okay, so back to the main point of today. So we're looking at highly magnetic structure. In fact, I will show that slide. So again, 1.36 thousand Tesla for something that you can see is 40 microns across. There is magnetic field in here, but this is also showing the magnetic intensity, and it's also here, right? In the center. But as we know from the work of Wheeler, that this is the gravitational azimuth, and I am saying that this is also where the toroidal moment acts, and so this will interact with the cold neutrinos. So you have a flux through here, so the gravitational azimuth is the one where the relic neutrinos are going through. Okay, and Lutz-Jaitner here, he calculates the magnetic fields up to 50 million Teslas. Okay, for a what was it? I think it was a 5 micron or something. I can't remember. There's the 5 orders of magnitude higher than the solar core. Nuclei density in the range of pulsars. And they exhibit pseudo-ferromagnetic behavior even at high temperatures. So they act as a magnet at super high temperatures. I am saying that they are effectively monopoles. And they can do this 3.6 trillion volts per meter charge separation. Okay. All right. So you can go over this and fill in anything that you don't already know about this. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the main thrust of today. So it acts as a pseudo-ferromagnetic at any temperature, or in my view and in view of many other researchers, they can actually have magnetic charges, but it doesn't matter if you have something that is paramagnetic, does it? Because it will go to a north or a south pole. Okay, So, what is going on? Well, you have really strong growth after a thunderstorm. And in fact, I was reminded of this a couple of weeks ago where we had this huge storm in the Czech Republic when I had just arrived in Poland for ICCF 25. And when I got back a few days later, the vegetables and everything in the garden, the weeds, everything, they had gone absolutely insane. They'd grown more in 6 days than they had grown probably in the previous 2 months. And that wasn't because they weren't getting water. They were getting something that they really, really liked. And the question is, you know, it wasn't just the water, because they were getting plenty of water. And my father always said, you know, rainwater, particularly storm rain water, is so much better for plants than tap water. And, you know, the usual argument that you'll be told is because it fixes nitration. Nitrates are formed in the environment by the lightning, and these are soluble in water, and that comes down, and the plants go mad because they're getting a dose of fertilizer effectively. But is it just that? Then we have, you know, and I don't believe it is. I think there's something else going on, and what is that? I don't know. But has anyone heard of the subject of a hyperbaric chamber? Hyperbaric chamber. Yeah? What is a... Because, like, there was this Russian work presented that was being done by a German company where they used corona discharge. And remember we saw earlier that George Miley was talking about synthesis on deuterated palladium thin film during corona discharge, and also Savatamova et al. Have explored this with nickel, hydrogen, and other elements. And yes, you get the transmutation, the transformation of elements. They had this corona discharge, I've spoken about it before, onto water, and the water was fed to seeds, and the seeds germinated faster and were more resilient to disease, and grew to a greater weight or something like that than those that were just given the same water but without the corona discharge treating. So given that something is causing the transmutation, is that happening in the water? Maybe new bioavailable elements, this is my argument, are forming, but maybe something else is happening. So maybe something is being captured into the water that is effectively bioavailable, and this is what I'm referring to with a hyperbaric chamber. And for those people that don't know what a hyperbaric chamber is, let's go and have a look at that, shall we? So this is an example of a service in London at Chelsea Bridge, and it's the hyperbaric oxygen treatment, London's first medically regulated hyperbaric oxygen clinic. Okay, and this is established 2006. Yeah, and down here we have the claims for this. So it says, like, HBOT is a therapy that delivers pure oxygen deeper into the cells to increase cellular energy and trigger your body's own repair process. It is FDA approved, extremely safe, and used therapeutically for many years. People with medical conditions under intense life pressure will benefit from deeper energy levels to function better and also repair, reversing or avoiding build-up inflammation, toxicity, and cellular damage. Latest HBOT research demonstrated astonishing results of up to 25 years biological age reversal. I think you can remember a famous pop artist using a hyperbaric chamber. You will be received close. Oh, that's bad English. Close to 100% pure oxygen in a comfortable cabin, lying down or seated, and experience gradual increases in atmospheric pressure and oxygen dosage according to your bespoke protocol. The Chelsea Bridge Clinic HBOT team has a nearly 10 years clinical experience across the full range of conditions and patients. Look, MS, ME, Crohn's, long COVID, well, it would do, wouldn't it? Fatigue, CFS, chronic fatigue syndrome, low energy and exhaustion, poor concentration, aging, this is a disease you all want to fix, isn't it? Aging, Parkinson's, psoriasis, UTIs, wounds, injuries, concussion, oncology, hearing loss, higher energy benefits, lower inflammation benefits, immune boost benefits, deeper restful sleep, faster tissue healing, aging damage reversal. Right, I want to focus on the immune boost. Why am I focusing on that? Well, Perevozchikov took water, exposed it to the air for, let's say, to the environment in a closed container, glass container, a Petri dish or something that was sealed, or a bottle or whatever, I can't remember exactly, for about 12 days or something like that, I can't recall offhand. And I did a presentation in Latin called Water of Life. And he then fired a laser at it, and it was observed on something like 400 ASA film, the exact same birdies. The exact same birdies that were observed by Shishkin et al. At Dubna, the nuclear research facility there, and exactly the same birdies observed under plasma flow water discharge by Bogdanovich et al. And in synchrotron in conversion target gamma ray induced production of these structures. And in exploring this type of radiation, I think it's called Priakin. They did it. The team, I think, led by a guy called Priakin. I need to verify that, but he did exploding wires, and they exposed these mice to a number of grays from a gamma source, sufficient to stimulate the production of cancers. And then they did that either before exposure to exploding wires, which we know from the Roetskev work produces these monopoles, and they fly around out of, even through water. Okay, so we know that happens. Okay, so they did mice with the grays of cancer-causing gamma radiation post-exposure to the flux of these monopoles, these magnetotoroelectrical radiation, and they did pre. So they did the exposure to the gamma ray previous. Now, you have two things here: faster tissue healing and immune boost. Okay? Faster tissue healing implies that the cells are able to divide faster. Immune boost implies that the things that do immune action in the body, which let's say might be white blood cells, would be doing the work better, or there might be more of them. Well, what I think it is, if I'm right in saying it's Priakin found, is that if you were exposed to gamma radiation prior to being exposed by the flux of magnetotoroelectrical radiation, you had your cancers accelerating. Why? Because it makes plants grow faster. It makes cells divide faster. If you already have a cell that is a bit uncontrolled with the way it divides, then it's going to grow a lot faster. That's not so good, right? Immune boost, what they found was, for the mice that were exposed to the flux of these monopoles, these magnetotoroelectrical radiation before, they found that they didn't develop cancers, or they didn't progress quite so fast. as far as I understand it, and I need to go back and look at it, but as far as my memory serves me, they found that the white blood cell count had gone up. Why? Well, because this accelerates cell division. So it accelerates the production of white blood cells, and the white blood cells go around the body and they eat up the emerging cancer cells before they have a chance to become, let's say, malignant. And this chimes very closely with David Hudson's claims that if you've already got cancer, you don't want to be taking Ormus. But if you know you haven't got cancer, then Ormus can maybe help you from not getting cancer. This is not medical advice. I'm just talking about claims and experiments. But this is FDA approved. It's clinically shown, according to this site, that it does these various things. Now, in the case of oncology, right, if you had paramagnetic oxygen, bound to that, you had the breath of life. You had a higher density of chi bound to the oxygen. When that goes into your blood, it goes through your blood circulation and through your bone marrow, where it is you are producing your white blood cells. And therefore, one could imagine in that instance, rather than a flux of radiation that is accelerating the cancers where they are, it's going into the bone marrow and causing an acceleration of the growth of the white blood cells. So you're getting the same kind of benefit from oncological terms. It's going out and doing that correction. So I am saying here, right now, that I believe the hyperbaric chamber, the Prare system, and similar systems, for instance, ones that are derived from Tesla, I think, what is it, the guy that made the first microscope that could see the bacteria. Anyway, these kind of systems, these are charging oxygen with bound, how should we put this, with bound life force, with bound chi, with bound clusters. And they are able to be absorbed into the body, from oxygen that you are breathing. This is why I believe that when you go outside, you're not someone that needs nitrates, right, when a storm has happened. But if you go outside and have a walk after a thunderstorm, right, you're not a plant. You don't need the nitrates, okay? You go outside after a thunderstorm and you feel really vital. I believe that is because it is the oxygen in the air that is being charged with these clusters that you are breathing in, and it feels really good. It's doing these things that it's claiming here. And in this way, this would also explain why Dr. Roshan Amarza and other claimants producing HHO generators with electrical discharge and cavitation going on are claiming that it improves health conditions. And I was told by Dr. Roshan Amarza there are clinics in Japan that use his devices successfully. He said that it is used in oncology. It would appear successfully, according to his claims. This is not medical advice. There are other people with HHO devices that are claiming the same thing. I'm saying that I believe there is a mechanism, it's a logical mechanism, and it works with how the body works. It's not doing what Priakin did in the exploding foils, exposing mice before that exposure, and so they had cancers on their way. It's really helping, okay? So when you understand this, we have the ability to seriously, potentially, extend life and fix long-term problems. It would also explain why highly processed food, water that's already been through a human, or breathed air, like you are stuck in solitary isolation, and you are breathing the same air over and over again, there might be plenty of oxygen in there, but you've already stripped it of its chi. Okay? And if it's not getting the flux in there, you are not getting that chi into your brain. You're not getting it into your body. Okay? So, for me, we are talking about fixing health, potentially. And it's really rather simple. It's a mechanism, a logical mechanism. Now, I'm going to show you why I think that is occurring and why I think HHO is so special and why that is explainable by this hypothesis. So, first, growth after thunderstorm, hyperbaric chamber, we've just gone over. Amasa gas, and I've just talked about that. Now, I'm going to talk something about Amasa gas that was said to me. Dr. Roshan Amasa sent me a warning to say that there is a hidden group and they do not want anyone to know about the properties of atomic hydrogen. He never explained what that was. It was just that's basically what he said. Okay? They don't want anyone to know about the properties of atomic hydrogen. But what I can tell you is that when Henk Uren is running one of his Vega experiments and he puts a itty bitty bit of hydrogen into a low pressure air environment, that is an environment that actually contains some oxygen, and you got those discharges with a few hundred electron volts of discharge, okay, and you need 5 electron volts, okay, and you've got ectons and whatever, you've got these charge build-ups, that almost instantaneously you have these balls of fire, these self-organizing electronic structures built at electronic speeds, forming like self-organizing clusters over the surface of material and in gaps and hiding inside metal holes and between cracks. Okay? So hydrogen is something, according to Kurolz and Shishkin, that is able to be charge separated correctly, creating the magnetotoroelectrical clusters 2,000 to 4,000 times easier than any element beyond lithium. And it isn't just breathing products that Dr. Roshan Amasa sold. This product, produced by pharmaceutical company limited Taisho, and I've shown it before here, okay, was an official product at the Rugby World Cup. And it's supposed to be an energy and health drink. And there are companies out there that use his cavitators, which we know does the same thing. The charge separation is just a little bit different process, but it can still eat hemispherical holes out of material like cavitation does. And I think we understand why. It apparently has health benefits, okay? And there's these people that process water with these kind of systems, okay? So what is going on? Well, free electrons are actually paramagnetic. And before we go too much into the rest of the mix of HHO, let's look at potentially a very detailed analysis of one of the most advanced HHO generators, the Dr. Roshan Amasa system. And here it is, the Amasa gas analysis conducted in the early 2000s by Tokyo Institute of Technology, National University in Tokyo, Japan. If you want to go and download this document with the English translations on it, you can grab it using your phone right now using that bit.ly, and you can that QR code, so you can go and grab the document right now as we talk through it. But here is the money shot. And what you can see is that it has H2, hydrogen, okay? And it's got a fairly high concentration of that. Hydrogen, when it burns, produces a fairly intense chemical reaction, which produces a lot of energy. If that is on the surface, perhaps some of the distribution of that energy will be such that some of the surface of, say, a metal would exceed energy levels of 5 electron volts, and it might resplit the atom and do proper charge separation. Maybe some of that is going on. You have some atomic hydrogen here. Now, it isn't specified whether this is a straight proton, a proton and electron, which is correct atomic hydrogen, or a proton and 2 electrons. It just says H. But here we've got a percentage, which is not nothing. Okay. Then we have H3 or HD. Okay. It's not nothing. We have the wonderful OH radical, which will self-maze, and we've talked about this before. But here we have 16 oxygen. This over here we have 3.9 mole percent of oxygen. One would expect you would get some sensible amounts of oxygen in there. You actually have water in there. There's some nitrogen, carbon monoxide. That's the mass level that could be represented by this. And then you've got a whole bucket load of oxygen here. Okay, and this one might, you might expect O2 at 18% mole percent and 23% over here. And then a very small amount of CO2. So what we can say about the gas itself is it clearly has oxygen and it clearly has some atomic hydrogen. Okay, but when you burn this, it will be highly energetic. And it will produce quite high temperatures, potentially locally on a metal surface with the interaction with the metal, and maybe that forms charge separation. But the way it's produced is not only by vibration, where you will have cavitation, and we've literally looked at the damage to the cavitating plates, and we've seen from the center of a cavitation spot the twin spiral vortex coming out. That's the first time that I witnessed that actually coming out of a cavitation spot, right out of the center. Okay, so in there, potentially a cavitation bubble collapsing can produce, let's say, 5,000 degrees centigrade. This is more than enough to create atomic hydrogen and well more energy than is, in those cavitating bubbles. You can imagine there's far more energy than is necessary to create proper charge separation. And if the magnetotoroelectrical cluster is then coming out, there is oxygen in the water there, dissolved in the electrolyzed water, and that can capture these clusters. Now, a lot of HHO experimenters have found that the first flush of gas is the best. It contains this dense stuff. And I have argued that is because the dissolved oxygen in the water is capturing these structures, and that is the special gas. Okay, once the dissolved oxygen is out of the way, as per Sundaresan and Bockris, you don't get this special gas. But where Mars's vibration system combined with the electrolysis wins over is that it is able to create continuously dissolved oxygen, so that the gas always has this great component that is able to do the work. So when you are potentially breathing this in a medical environment, it's continually producing this good gas, which has the bound magnetotoroelectrical clusters, these Low-Shax monopoles in Leonid terms, bound to the oxygen and able to enter the body via breathing. The hydrogen at this point isn't important, in my view. It's the oxygen with the bound clusters, and the bound clusters are synthesized by proper charge separation of the hydrogen. So the hydrogen is important in the synthesis, but I don't believe it is important in the breathing. Now, when you go into a hyperbaric chamber, they're taking oxygen from the environment, okay, or that has been distilled from the environment, and they are pressurizing your chamber with that. That oxygen from the environment will have a component of the breath of life, of chi in it, okay, and it's giving you more chi. The oxygen is not the key, it's the chi, right? It's in there. So let's look at the properties of these various things that are in there. Okay. It's going to get a little bit technical, but I've cut out all the equations and everything. I'm just giving you the money here. Right. So the nucleon, magnetic moment of protons and neutrons. Bearing in mind that as we are starting out by saying that this structure produces incredibly intense localized magnetic fields, and most of the authors will say that ions get bound to this. But what kind of ions are going to be the important ones in our process? Well, the magnetic moment of a proton, with these references here, nucleon magnetic moment on Wikipedia, the magnetic moment of a proton is surprisingly large, and it was directly measured in 1933 by Otto Stern's team in University of Hamburg. The strength of the magnetic moment of a free proton is much larger than that of a free neutron, which has a negative value. This indicates that the proton and neutron are not elementary particles, but are composed of smaller constituents called quarks, which have their own magnetic moments that combine to give the nucleons their magnetic moments. I've done the maths. You can go and verify it. I might be wrong, but anyway. The proton's magnetic moment is about 2.46 times larger than the neutron's magnetic moment in absolute value. So if we have a structure that has intense magnetic fields and a core that is highly magnetic and presents itself at any temperature whatsoever as pseudo-ferromagnetic, and I believe is 1 or 2 charges, if you have something that has a magnetic moment, it can be pulled into that. But how big is it compared to the magnetic moment of atomic hydrogen? Well, relatively, and this needs to be checked. I have been wrong in the past. I may well be wrong now, but this is where I'm at with my thinking. Relatively, the proton's magnet would be stronger and point in the same direction as the external field, while the neutron's magnet would be weaker and point in the opposite direction. The proton's magnet would have a stronger attraction or repulsion with other magnets, while the neutron's magnet would have a weaker interaction. What does that mean? I believe that means if you have a magnetic structure and it's able to pull in something that has a magnetic moment, if it's a proton, it will align with the magnetic fields and it will increase the intensity of the magnetic fields that are there. It's additive. And so you can imagine that when Henk Uren is adding the hydrogen in there and the electric discharge dissociates it and you produce these protons, they are easily able to intensify the charge clusters, the structures that are there, and produce those balls of fire. Okay? So the magnetic moment of atomic hydrogen is slightly bigger. That, when I say atomic hydrogen, this is a proton with an electron going around it. Okay? Is slightly bigger than a free proton. But the difference is very small. The magnetic moment of atomic hydrogen is a vector sum of the following contributions: the intrinsic moment of the electron, the orbital motion of the electron around the proton, the intrinsic moment of the proton, and the interaction between the electron and proton moments. Right, let's put that into real language. The intrinsic moment of the electron is much larger than that of the proton, but it has an opposite sign. The orbital motion of the electron adds a positive contribution to the magnetic moment, which depends on the orbital angular momentum quantum number, I. The interaction between the electron and proton moments is a negative contribution, which depends on the spin quantum numbers S and I. The net result is that, this is the important bit, the magnetic moment of atomic hydrogen is slightly larger than that of a free proton when I equals 0. That is the s orbital. And slightly smaller when I is greater than 0, the p, d, f, etc. orbitals. This means that atomic hydrogen has this uniquely additive process of having the electron in the s orbital at the ground state. Okay? Whereas when it's in other systems, that's not the case. Right? The difference in magnetic moment between the atomic hydrogen and free proton is delta mu is 0.0003 ball magnetons. Okay? It doesn't really matter. Essentially, it's just good when you've got a proton and an electron. Okay? Now remember what we need for our reactions that were proposed to Binge and Huang. We need a proton and an electron. We separated those out in the equation for ease of readability. So we had 1H1 and then the electron separately. They could be an atomic hydrogen, and that would be slightly more overall beneficial, and it can go into the same magnetic structure here and in fact align with it. So atomic hydrogen is very special indeed. You're not allowed to know why, but I think you're learning why. Okay, so next up, the magnetic moment of atomic hydrogen, then the attributes critical to clusters. A proton's magnetic moment, therefore, just recapping, is about 2.46 times larger than the neutron's magnetic moment in absolute value, and it aligns in the same direction as an external field, adding to it / strengthening it. The magnetic moment of atomic hydrogen, a single proton with an electron orbiting it in the ground state, is slightly bigger than that of a free proton, but it can go in and it adds to the magnetic field, and it's a collective thing. Okay. In addition, atomic hydrogen, a proton with an unpaired electron, this is key, that's what defines, this atomic hydrogen, is paramagnetic, which means it is attracted to the north or south magnetic, and I've put monopoles there deliberately. Okay, so Luciana is saying that a condensed plasmoid can be a ferromagnetic, pseudo-ferromagnetic structure at any temperature. Paramagnetic is the same. It can go and join a north or south magnetic pole, and so it does not matter whether you've got the spin on the original cluster going one way or the other, okay, in your counter-rotating vortices. One will end up charging it one way, and the other one will end up charging it the other, okay, because the spins will align with the relative spins, okay, or rather the magnetic field lines of the magnetic structure at all sub-levels, okay? Okay. H2, the hydrogen molecule with paired electrons, is diamagnetic. It's diamagnetic. What does that mean? It means it is expelled from a magnetic field. So, if H2 approaches this structure here, it doesn't want to be there. It doesn't want to be there. You need protons, or ideally atomic hydrogen. Therefore, atomic hydrogen is critical for cluster formation. It is critical for cluster formation. I may be wrong, but this is my viewpoint right now. Now, what about oxygen? Oxygen is paramagnetic, and it is uniquely so. This is my view that came out of looking at Sundaresan and Bockris, and it was confirmed by the observation of Leonid Uritskev in explaining various processes that occurred in Chernobyl. Okay? The magnetic moment of atomic oxygen with an unpaired electron, so this is O minus, yeah, or whatever, an unpaired electron on atomic oxygen, so similar to your1H1, is about 658 times stronger than the free proton magnetic moment. Okay? So oxygen really wants to grab things. It's paramagnetic also. So if you have something that is a little magnet, it will want to come and join this atomic oxygen. But what happens if we look at O2? This is the unique paramagnetic nature of O2. Look at this. The O2 magnetic moment is about 18,714 times stronger than the free proton magnetic moment. 18,714 times stronger than the free proton magnetic moment. So, what's going to grab our structures better? Oxygen in our water or atomic oxygen? Oxygen, answers on a postcard, please. Right? And it increases greatly, as I've discussed before, as temperature drops. So, you don't want the water to get too hot, but it's still super duper intense magnetic moment. Right. So, when Henk urine has got a low pressure, low temperature reactor, low pressure air, he has O2 in that environment. Okay? The hydrogen is, firstly, when it's split up, when it produces the magnetotoroelectrical radiation, these neutral charge clusters, well, they're not charge clusters, they're just the neutral EVOs. They have their moment, and they are like monopole-like structures, and they assemble, and they can grab the hydrogen, monatomic hydrogen, and these can all bind to the oxygen. You can see how this is just like, it's like throwing a load of different strength magnets into a bag and shaking up the bag. Well, they're going to form lumps, aren't they? They're going to form lumps, right? What about O3? O3 has a magnetic moment which is about 351 times stronger than the free proton magnetic moment. So, can anyone tell me, on the sort of guess, which of these three things I would want in my environment? Would I want atomic oxygen? Would I want O2? Or would I want O3? Anyone guess? What would I want in my environment? What is generally available in the atmosphere at the height at which lightning occurs, at which these huge clusters, these exotic vacuum objects form that do the discharge? Can anyone guess? Do we want O, atomic? Do we want O2 or do we want O3? Well, water vapor's good, yes. You can separate that space case, yes. you can make your oxygen and hydrogen from the water vapor. Well, okay, I think you know. All right, so that being put, one what? Fair enough. Are you talking amongst yourselves? Can you even hear me? O2, very good, Starfish Troopers. You get the prize. Well done. Someone's listening. I was wondering if anyone was listening. I'm talking to myself. Okay, so yes, we want O2. All right. Okay, so let's revisit Sundaresan and Bokris, 1994, in light of apparently confirmed prediction in Bin Juan Huang et al.'s work, which was presented at ICCF 25. We argued that atomic hydrogen, which is this 1H1, which is a proton, plus an electron, that is atomic hydrogen. It's just separated out to see that there's 4 interacting particles. This is not 2 particles coming together. This is 4 structures coming together, okay? 1H1 plus E minus plus the antineutrino. And I'm saying that the antineutrino can come from the proper charge separation of hydrogen because it comes out as these clusters. Yeah? Or the fractal toroidal cluster itself coheres this into the phase singularity from the relic neutrino condensate. So you have your torus with your fractal toroidal moment. It interacts with the toroidal moment of the relic neutrino, and that comes into the phase singularity. And in there also we are passing our atomic hydrogen through, and we are also passing our paramagnetic oxygen through. Okay? And in fact, we are passing likely, because it's much more paramagnetic, we are likely passing through 2 at a time. Yeah? Because what we've shown here, if we can go to it, it's a lot more reactive. So, we have O2 going in, super duper paramagnetic, into the intense magnetic field, as we showed in the peer-reviewed mainstream journal paper, goes through the core, not just around the ring. And this is cohering either neutrino, cold neutrinos, in this case relic antineutrinos, from the environment. As I talked about Shishkin's cavitator, it had a fall off. It produced the birdies, but he found that he had to move it sometimes because it stopped producing the birdies, and he had to put it to a different part of the laboratory. And Then it started producing these birdies again, which means the structures themselves are pulling this chi from the environment up to a distance away. And this is part of the warning that I gave to the team that are testing the thunderstorm generator. So either way, you're creating them from the hydrogen in the water, or hydrogen added into your reactor. Atomic hydrogen, relic antineutrinos, O2. A bunch of these will produce two 17 O's. These both have spin 502. These really like to be in that core. They don't want to go anywhere, and they go through some process, which I am saying is some type of fusion process, because they are quantum coherent in that core, in the phase singularity, and there is an intense electromagnetic pressure in there at that phase singularity, and they fuse and fission, producing two diamagnetic structures, which are kicked out. 12 carbon and 12 neon. And this would appear to be the prediction, and it was verified by very many means. What are the implications for Bockris if we were to assume that a similar thing occurred in his experiment? Well, this is what I am proposing. Rather than what he showed here, this rare isotope of oxygen 18 and carbon 12, which is diamagnetic, and it doesn't really want to be living in there. We know it doesn't want to be living in there because it gets kicked out, and we see it everywhere. All this is carbon around here. It doesn't want to be inside the core. Okay, it's always on the outside. It gets kicked out, right? So it doesn't want to be in there. So I'm not buying that this now is carbon. Okay, diamagnetic. We have shown that it gets kicked out to the outside, and it would seem that that is the case here. So what could it be? Well, wouldn't you know it? If you have 4 17 oxygens, you end up by synthesizing 12 carbon plus 56 iron. Yep. 12 carbon plus 56 iron. That is basically the same kind of reaction here, but we have iron in the core. Well, what do we see in the ball lightning of Henk-Uran? Well, we see it producing an iron core. The carbon gets kicked to the outside, but the iron core is in there. What do we see being produced in the ultra experiment of Alan Goldwater? Well, we see the same iron crenellated rich core and carbon kicked to the outside. Oh my God. We literally have something that actually completely follows the scientific evidence. Now, what are the reaction products here? Well, if you do the maths, basically 2 17s go to 34 sulfur, and then 34 sulfurs fuse, and that reaction the exchange reaction of 234 sulfurs, which you can do on the MFMP Alexander Parkhomov data-based reaction calculator at nanosoft.co.nz, programmed by Philip Power. Thank you very much, Philip Power. You end up with 2 times 28.3202 mega electron volts, plus there's a little bit here of 0.7433 MeV. Okay, the little tail end reaction there. So let's do that maths. Let's bring up a calculator and do that math. Let's see what we end up with there. I'm gonna do it right here now, because okay, so times 2 equals 56.6404 plus 0.7433 equals 57.3837. Now, what did Bockris and Sundaresan, the Bobber Atomic Research Center guy, calculate their reaction produced? Are we in the same ballpark? They observed 56.55 in their reaction. What are we observing? We're observing 57.3837. This is so close as to mean that we are essentially as qualified a reaction to explain the thermal observations they had. And there we go. And you know what this produces? If we've got an input of 50 watts and you've got an extra 135 watts, well, you're talking about a COP of maybe 3.5. 3.5 watt times COP. Is that right? That's at least 3.5 times, and that is within the ballpark that we are exceeding a heat pump. That means we have a system which complies with the observations. Okay? It's essentially the same reaction. It leaves iron 56 in the core, okay, the magnetic core. This is exactly what we observe in Henk-Urans. This is exactly what we observe in the ball lightning that collided with the soil and was recovered. The same 20 micron iron-rich crenellated sphere. Exactly the same. So natural ball lightning produces the same structure as in Henk-Urans Vega Valley as in the Ultra experiment. The iron gets left in the core, the carbon gets kicked to the outside. Same as has been seemingly proved here. But in this case, you get both neon and carbon kicked to the outside. But the process is the same. It requires necessarily the unique properties of atomic hydrogen, 1H1 plus E minus in a composite particle, 16 oxygen, which is the most abundant isotope of oxygen, both available in the Ultra experiment and both available in the nature, in the air, and both available in Henk-Urans Vega experiment. Neutrinos available in the environment. The cluster itself, the toroidal cluster, will have this toroidal moment, which will capture these from the environment, but you could accelerate it by having the right level of discharge in your environment. All of these things are present in the system of Roy-Shinamaza. And this will lead to the production of 17 oxygen, and this will lead to the observed, and it would seem proved products, and just extending it. You don't need anything more than this. You will end up with the observed carbon and the observed iron. And this is what, if you can imagine, you go and look at the work of George Ossuer. George Ossuer said that his iron was special properties. And one would expect that if you had almost all of the iron atoms as iron 56, if all of the iron atoms were iron 56, then the crystal structure would be very, very perfect. Very perfect. Because it wouldn't have atoms of different, mass in there, like slightly deforming the arrangement of the matter. Okay? And the process of LENR, which exists all over the world, and bacteria that like to, anyway, the point being is it's already at this perfect binding energy element isotope. Okay, and there we have it, my friends. HHO is magic. I think we are at the point of completely understanding what that magic is. I think what I've told you today with what I've said over the last couple of years will help you understand how HHO can be optimized, what the potential benefits are for health, and how you can make systems which could improve health, both of growing plants and already existing plants, or biological entities of a higher order. I'm not giving medical advice. I'm not saying that this will work. I'm just saying if you follow the logic, you can probably see that it may work. And it would also explain Prare. It would also explain the guy that I can't remember the name of, and maybe someone can put it in the chat, the guy that did the microscope first, and Rife, Raymond Rife, Royal Raymond Rife. It would explain many of these phenomena relatively trivially, but from the basis of the properties of atomic hydrogen and the properties of oxygen, which are both present in water. Okay, so with that said, I will see if you've got any questions. I said it was going to be a short one tonight. I have one closing comment to make. Show has made me aware, and it didn't influence what I was going to say tonight. This is what I was going to say tonight. I shared something with him earlier in the week, and he let me know that Roy Shinamaza is hanging up his inventing time, and he is looking to sell his apparatus and his company. Given that the patents have effectively expired, I don't know what that actually means, but it's the expertise that he has that I think would be incredibly important to capture for humanity, for posterity, and so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I would love to help set that up. I don't know whether I'm the right person, but I would love to help set that up to try and enable that to happen. I would hate to see his HHO running car and his supposedly HHO, or rather a Mars gas closed loop system and compression system and analysis and data and whatever. I would hate to see that go to a for-profit organization. Maybe that would be the best place for it. I don't know. My view would be if there was someone out there altruistic enough and with the right means, if Roy Shinamaza would be willing to work for a number of years, and it would need that because you would have to make sure that nothing was missed to clarify every kind of like really decision that was made in developing the technology and why, so it could be properly documented. Because he's approaching his mid-80s. He had an accident in recent years, as you know, and I don't want this to be another lost invention. But I think we're close to properly understanding HHO and why it works, and that has been enabled by you guys for helping support this project, and my contributions to it. I have to thank Show very much so. Obviously, Benjamin Huang for having the confidence to test my hypothesis a couple of years ago, and also for Alan Goldwater to just have a go and see if he created iron-rich crenellated spheres. So, and all you need, this is just hilarious. The only things you need are hydrogen and oxygen. That's it. Just water. And you gain the preformed clusters from the hydrogen, 2,000 to 4,000 times easier to create the magnetoelectrical radiation. If you don't work it, then you can still get it from the environment up to a point. You have the 16 oxygen in there, and what you mostly get synthesized from these systems is carbon. It's not surprising why. And that you can synthesize iron for it, and there is a lot of energy to be gained from this cold fusion. So, Slobodan Stankovic is saying, any idea why my spectrometer is showing only OH radicals when measuring the HHO plasma at the output of 3 to 4 millimeters on the nozzle? Well, I think it's fairly well established, Slobodan, that the various components of the gas come in different parts of the flame. That's one thing. Two, as we've discussed before, OH self-mazes, and it will probably then produce the spectrum of itself, and it may be that is so intense, the spectrum, that it's self-reinforcing, that maybe it saturates the observation of anything else that you're seeing. It may be that the binding of the clusters to the oxygen prevent observation of other spectra, because it is so effective at doing that. Whatever. I think it's fairly clear to say that something is able to be produced in this process. And if you look at his gas, the analysis of his gas, he also has OH, but he has hydrogen and oxygen. And the hydrogen, like I say, if it's burning or you've got the atomic hydrogen there, then it can do this job. But in my view, a lot of the magic has already occurred in his vibrating electrolyzer. Because it's vibrating, you've got the cavitation. This self-organizes and creates the constant flux of oxygen, which is the aggregator, as it were, this paramagnetic oxygen. It's the aggregator, and the impacts and the discharges also, the electrolyzing process, produce between them the EMTA, the magnetotoroelectrical radiation, the clusters of relic neutrinos, or background neutrinos, as Shishkin and Korols call them, and they are binding to the oxygen. So the work is actually done in the vibrating electrolyzer. In their instance, you have to work harder if you're not got the vibration going on. And also in his vibrating electrolyzer, he actually has his electrodes with round holes in them. So he's kind of doing what was later done by Leclerc. And the Leclerc, because you've got holes, and he had two different size holes, they will cause turbulence and they will cause ring solitons. So you've got something that's forcing these type of structures to be formed in the electrolyzer in many ways. You've got the turbulence of the vibration, and you've also got the turbulence of the holes in the electrolyzing plates. And also he would have flow through the device. So there's lots of different turbulence going on in there, working to both dissolve the oxygen that's produced to keep the heavy gas active in production, and to maximize the amount of exceeding this threshold for hydrogen of 5 electron volts. Thank you, Corky, for your kind words. Morning, DIY projects with chances. Like I say, I would like people to go and... I'll just run over the presentation in a little while, but I'd like people to verify what I've said today. But I think it comes down to the unique nature of atomic hydrogen, the production of the in-process proper charge separation, and the unique properties of O2 interacting with an overall magnetic structure. Bob, if this is very viable, yes, like, yeah. Well, I was warned about it, but there was no clarification of why. But, health drinks, healthy breathing, and Amaza is not the only person that's claimed that this can produce health benefits. And you have an FDA approved system, the hyperbaric chamber, which has shown to repair and assist. And when you know that it is the thing, oxygen, that is able to aggregate these clusters, as shown by the glow over Chernobyl, and in my view, originally in the work of Sundaresan and Bockris, the only works to produce iron if you have oxygen dissolved in the water. And we know that these things produced from exploding metals, and exploding metals will need the electron volt per atom to be much, much higher, the unidirectional discharge, like Tesla was doing to create his ether streams. It needs to be much higher for metals, okay? But they were coming out at 0.7 of a meter. They were flying at a relatively fast velocity, and it might be that they need to be slowed to a certain degree before they can be captured by the oxygen nucleus. All right, so the oxygen that's synthesized on one of the electrodes may not be in a suitable form. And firstly, it's very high temperature. And then secondly, it might be not even atomic high oxygen. It might just be O, right? Like just, atomic oxygen. So it's going to be atomic oxygen, isn't it? But it's much, much lower. If you look at the figures here, atomic oxygen is so much more pathetic here at 658 times than O2's magnetic moment of 18,714 times. It's like, which is going to be able to aggregate these more? Oxygen dissolved in the water when the clusters have traveled a bit in the water, or is it going to be the oxygen evolved at one of the electrodes? No, sorry, it's going to be oxygen dissolved in the water. So by producing oxygen in the Amasa vibrator plates and then forcing it to break up into very small bubbles by passing it through highly turbulent environment, including electrolyzer plates that I've got round holes drilled in them, right? You are going to accelerate the dissolving of the oxygen that's synthesized in the water. So the whole body of the water is able to capture the clusters that are forming from the cavitation and the electrolysis process going on at the counter electrode. Okay, so there we go. Yeah, I mean, just to clarify, Cosmic Dave's, it's not revolutionary. It's confirmatory. It's confirmatory of what has already been claimed by many, many people, right? But there hasn't really been a clear, concise, scientifically and element property and element ion based explanation to the best of my knowledge. Okay, and I don't blame people because they didn't understand toroidal moment. It wasn't in almost anyone's lexicon. They didn't understand charge clusters. Almost no one knows about them. So like I say, I constantly feel like I'm cheating. But it's like that old sign that I saw on a military base in India. It says, it's funny, the harder I work, the luckier I get. And I wanted to solve these problems. But the implications are unbelievably profound. They are unbelievably profound for health, for matter manipulation, for energy systems, all the above. And as I said to the LENR at ICCF 25, really, the work of Martin Fleischmann and Stanley Pons is really HHO or DDO, and the work of Mizuno is the same. Ball lightning, which is implicated in most of these other systems, is born out of HHO. It just is. So, Leclerc, Simon Clary. He says Leclerc or Leclerc? Leclerc. Creating Awareness says, was Amasa gas generated in pure water or was potassium hydroxide added? I think potassium hydroxide is added. Obviously, potassium, if you have cavitation with potassium, it is the least stable primordial isotope, which is a beta emitter. And if you have an inverse beta reaction, which we're saying these structures cause, that will produce beta, that will produce these intense electrons coming out, and that will just accelerate the process. So potassium hydroxide is a good thing in this environment. Okay. The H2O or earth and ground state. Yep. Chi binds to oxygen 2 very well. Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. I've defined what chi is. So Terranite is saying chi binds to oxygen 2 very well. I've defined what chi is, in my view. I've defined how you can extract it from the environment or extract it from where it's hidden inside matter. The Russians have clarified the easiest element to extract it from when it's hidden in matter to produce clean matter, clean etheric streams is from hydrogen isotopes. Tesla said anything beyond aluminium is no good. And he chose aluminium, magnesium, or beryllium. But you don't want beryllium because it's toxic. So aluminium or magnesium. Yes, Corky says the ancients must have used this. Well, every organism that has ever lived uses this, whether they know it or not, in my view. But yes, because it's so relatively trivial, yes, it's almost certain that they've done it. Super paramagnetic, yes, that exists. So, Bob, does a maser have to run at a specific ultrasound frequency to develop the correct gas? In the one that we tested, the original vibrators, it was running at 179 hertz or something. It was 3 times 60 hertz roughly, because of the 3-phase and the vibrator works like that. But if you recall, if you go to the Quantum Heat and look at the maser data on there, you'll see that I captured using the 384 kilohertz microphone the fact that it was producing ultrasonic frequencies. Now, is the ultrasonic frequencies predominantly coming from harmonics in the vibratory system, or is it coming from cavitation bubbles? I don't know. But both from Sonotrode and from a remote external mic, it was producing ultrasonic frequencies. So the actual cavitator that is inside the oxyhydrogen maser gas generator, I think it runs at a higher frequency. But as Stringham has shown, it doesn't matter whether you're using 20 kilohertz or 43 kilohertz or 1.7 megahertz. It doesn't matter. Your standing waves are there's just more standing waves. And because the standing wave is able to add energy into a point, accumulate the energy, it doesn't really matter what the frequency is. It's just the number of accumulation points are higher when you've got a higher frequency. So is there electrolyte? So just had a thunderstorm here today, says Harry. I always like them. So do I. And I would recommend that after every thunderstorm, people go out for a brisk walk and take in some of that lovely, life-giving, chi-infused oxygen. Why do we have 2 nostrils? I bet there's Sothic funnels. Well, the 2 nostrils it's redundancy for one, and 2, it's either side of the vortex, isn't it? So there we go. Industrial Revolution. This is a new dawn of an old age. This was known. I don't know whether it was known at this level of scientific level, but it was known. It was known, and it was just like, you do this and things are better. And it's just experience for people that aren't staring at TikTok videos all day. Sorry, I didn't really mean to advertise that organization, but like, they're not distracted, right? They're just looking at nature the whole time because they're having to live in it. Bob, what do we need to verify this for ourselves this year? To confirm for ourselves, I have been invited to a meeting re-projects. My top priority, really, to confirm this, is to see if the iron spheres created in ultra experiments or in the Vega Valley or one of these other systems that produce these iron-rich crenellated spheres, to see if the iron is a higher concentration of 56, right? So, like, if we go to, and it's a little bit difficult because obviously that is, the most common isotope. But if we go to the reaction calculator here, and I go here, File, New Tab. If you go to nanosoft.co.nz, if I can actually type, it would help. If you go to nanosoft.co.nz, and I'm going to make that a bit bigger for you guys. Right, so if I go to show element data here, and this is how you, this is why I asked Philip Power to add these properties in here so that I could test my understanding as it developed. I asked him to put the diamagnetic nature in here. I asked him to put the spin properties of the matter in here. These various other magnetic properties in here, you know, it's not necessary to go into them, and the magnetic volume susceptibility and these things and the Curie point, all of these were put in because several years ago I realized the importance of the magnetic you know, nature to matter. And if we go down to iron, where are we? Iron here. You'll see that iron 56 is 91.66% of iron. Now, we do have this beautiful thing that we have these very, very, very specific structures, and we've clearly got them separated in various samples. So we could use secondary iron mass spectrometry, or possibly if we can isolate a bunch of them and put them in a matrix, we could use matrix assisted laser dispersion ionization secondary iron mass spectrometry or whatever, where you shoot a laser into these things. And if we observe iron concentration of 56, much higher than 91.66%, and I don't necessarily expect it to produce iron 57. Okay, so we might see this iron 56 enriched, possibly like we saw with the neon 22, because the neon 22 comes from this emitting carbon reaction and neon 22. There is no neon 21 and there is no neon 20. It just doesn't happen. Right? Carbon is produced in these systems. Many, many authors, right? Many, many authors. So we get this very distinct outcome from the interaction of 17 oxygen. Carbon produced here, which we see in the samples. This is the only outcome that happens with the 17 oxygen, right? Well, let me just confirm that. I don't want to say something wrong. So I because I don't have multi-element thing, I can do a reaction chain here, but what we will do is we will go to 2-to-2 reactions here, and we will put in our A1, and we'll say that equals to 34 sulfur. That's 2 17s fusing, and we'll do A2 equals, am I doing fusion here? No, 2-to-2, that's right. A2 is also 34. Okay. Now, this all happens simultaneously, but you get the idea. Okay. And we don't need the neutrinos at this point, so we go like that. What do we get? We get, yeah, this one. It's not actually a very energetic reaction. Okay. Carbon 12 and iron 56. So there we go. That's the reaction. So this is the little bit of energy you get at the end, the 0.7433 that I had on my chart here. That's the actual reaction there for that exchange reaction. Okay. But because it's 4 that come in together, it might be because there's 4 17 oxygens fusing that results in this particular outcome where it doesn't favor this particular outcome. Or it might be down to the pressure. Okay. But that's what we see. We see carbon and we see the iron 56. So very simply, have we got a non-naturally isotopic ratio of iron 56 like we had the non-naturally isotopic ratio of neon, and it would be coming from exactly the same process going on. Okay. So that would be absolute 100% slam dunk. This is how it works. This is how ball lightning works. This is how the Vega experiment works. Done. And it would also be how George Osher's reaction works. Okay. And almost anyone that's got $35 and access to some form of secondary iron mass spectrometry could verify this. So, you know, if no one else will do it, of course the MFMP will do it. But, you know, I kind of like to make a prediction and someone else do it. It's kind of better that way. Does being a psychic count as cheating? Yeah, I think partly remote viewing. It kind of feels like cheating, but I honestly don't know whether I'm accessing the Akashic record or my bloodline, or I don't know what it is, but you know, a lot of these properties that we're talking about here, you know, they weren't known. These things weren't known that I've been going through here. They just weren't known before. So, like, they hadn't been assessed, at least in the modern era. So, like, maybe they were known because the properties didn't change. They didn't change. Right. Corky goes, so ball lightning always mysterious. I think it's becoming less mysterious by the day. It exists, therefore it can be described. What describes it? I think we're getting close to understanding it. You know, it still has a lot of things that are magical about it, sure, but to make it and to see what it does, I think we're getting closer to understanding that. Water thermalizes chi to be more easily picked up to... Yeah, I think probably it does. So I think there's this story of this Frenchman that went to look at the Mexican method of alchemy. And they used these copper, very important, bowls. And they put water in the bowls. And they stood the water out in the sun for a fairly long period of time. Why? Well, it would be oxygenating. It would be... gathering these clusters from the environment, just as Perovskikov did. And of course, copper is diamagnetic, and it does not absorb hydrogen. And so anything coming into a parabolic bowl will be focused into the bowl. And then he was able to synthesize gold using this water as part of the process in his alchemical process, and it was meant to be the purest gold that was ever observed, blah, 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 from synthesis and so on. So I was talking to someone about who's actually in health today, just because I was at a birthday party, and I said, look, you know, why, when you put water out into outside, does it, you know, within days start having a lot of life? Is it just because it's water? I don't think it is. I think it's because it gets oxygen, and then it starts gathering this chi from the environment. It gets bound to the oxygen in the water, and animals, just like whatever it is, gnats and mosquitoes, they just love it. They absolutely love it, because it's just concentrated chi. And so it's really good for that. So I suggested probably that you could get your water from your water source, whatever that is. Let's say you're living in a city, and you put it in containers which are sealed. You don't want anything contaminating it, and you just leave it out in the sun. And you leave it out in the sun, and you just have it in rotation, these bottles. You wash them out, of course, between sittings, and you let it stand. And you let it get exposed to the air. And I would particularly suggest to do this with fish, for instance. You could, rather than experimenting on yourself, let's say you have a fish tank. When you're breeding your guppies, do you get more guppies by changing their water, using water that stood outside in the sun for maybe 12 days, like Perovskikov did? Is it better for the fish? And, you know, like if you change your fish's water every 12 days, then, you know, maybe it would be better to use water processed in this way. And, then maybe you would have some confidence that it's better for your own health. And I'm not giving health advice, but I suspect that this may be true. And I'm not so sure it's actually relevant whether it is summer or winter, other than that when the Earth is closer to the sun, it goes through a denser relic neutrino sphere, according to the work of Alexander Parkhomov. So, but there is also this special time where you might want to, but in early to mid December, where you have this alignment between the black hole or Evo at the center of the universe and Betelgeuse, where you might want to put some water out and have a drink of that. So I think just simple approaches like this to make aqua vitae, as I think it's called, water of life. You could do that, and it's harmless. Like, you're leaving it in a sealed container. It's the water you would drink anyway. Even if you buy mineral water, like, maybe you could do that. You don't want to end up in a situation where the sun leaches some chemicals from the container that you're in. So I would use some fairly neutral container, probably something like silicon dioxide based, and you leave that outside. So maybe one of these bottles which have a sealing lid on them, and you just stack them outside. So I think maybe people could see some real health benefits from doing that rather than drinking water straight out of the tap. Certainly, I would suggest that if you're putting water in a microwave to heat it up, not a good idea. I'm pretty confident that this will cause the release of the chi from the food even, but and I've argued this before, from the water, and you're drinking dead water. Tucker tries, I believe this research and development needs to be made known and addressed with sobriety and transparency. Absolutely. I've tried to do what I can. I feel deeply honored to have played my role. Whether I'm right or wrong, time will tell. But it is nothing I've invented. It is just what the universe does. It cannot be owned. It is the God's toolbox, and it cannot be improved upon. It cannot be improved upon. You cannot change the nature of the matter. You can use what it wants to do and what it can do, but you cannot change the nature of the matter, and you cannot improve upon the way it wishes to organize itself. You can have an opinion on whether it should organize something differently, but it doesn't. It organizes the way it wants to organize it. And if you're working against nature, you are making your life difficult. That is the real truth of the matter. You will always be making your life difficult. It always has the upper hand. It will do what it wants to do. Ultimately, you're just getting in the way of what it wants to do. Cosmic Dave, mainstream science is well known for protecting their old paradigms. They may be, but when you start seeing people really much more healthy, if it works, but there's a lot of people claiming this, and the hyperbaric chamber is FDA approved. Why? Is it just oxygen? I mean, really? People take a lot of antioxidants to avoid oxygen radicals in their body. Adding more oxygen makes you healthy? No, I think it's more interesting than that. I think it's the oxygen is containing something. And I think the reason that the HHO breathers apparently, don't get a match near you when you're breathing HHO. They're super dangerous, ultra dangerous, right? No one does this at home, kids. No one does this at home. But the claims are that it has significant health benefits. And I can logically see from a scientific basis, based on experiment and the properties of the matter and the states of the ions, that it should work. So Corky says creation has to be negative entropy, not merely entropy. Yeah, it is neg entropy. Of course, it's the organizing force of the monopole of the yin force. It's the yin force. You know, why there's always this question, why is most of the matter in the universe, left chirality? Well, probably that's the yin force. There you go. If it's right chirality, then it's disassembling condensed matter. It's the breaker. It is the male force. But you do need the male force to help the yin force. You need the yang force to help the yin force in order to create forms of life. You need to take life or condensed matter in another form and process that using the yang force, the male force, and give that to the yin. But the female has the yang in them. It's within them to do this also. But it is just the nature of the male force to go out and break stuff up, bring it back in usable product that then the yin force can create more life with. So Steve T, yeah, but O3 is toxic. Yeah, I would avoid creating O3. I mean, maybe in a small proportion, it's useful to have toxicity to sterilize things. But, O3 is just not very good at doing this, as the data suggests. If we are to assume that we have a highly magnetic structure and it assembles through magnetism, then 351 times stronger than the proton's magnetic moment. Relatively, it's like nearly half as good as atomic oxygen, but dissolved oxygen in water, it's absolutely the thing you want. It's so much better than the other things. And cold water is even better. Cool, pure water with dissolved oxygen that has chi bound to it. Cool, pure water with oxygen that has dissolved chi next to it. What do you think would happen when a Marsa gas is used to energize Geet? Well, that's sort of what is going on with Malcolm Bendel's thunderstorm generator. So he has the air coming in through a UV ionizer. The UV ionizer is a method of using high energy photons to create charge clusters. This was one of the methods that was a potential method that could have been used by Paul Collock in his ball lightning generating, his Plasmac patent from 1973. He just suggests ionizing method. It could be some radioactive element, it could be an electrical discharge, a corona discharge, or it could be high energy photons. So he's got that coming in. I explained to Malcolm Bendel that this will be producing or augmenting or helping cluster the clusters that are already present there into the oxygen. It'll be bound into the oxygen. Then when he passes it through its little air brick and he's producing air coming out of his air brick, that is little holes, and as it comes out, they necessarily would have turbulence, and this will help cohere and condense into toroidal structures these smaller structures. And then this gets fed into the reactor. And so it's not surprising that he's getting what he's getting. He's using a couple of different methods that have been used in the past. He's removed the central rod, but effectively it's got the same counterflow that you get. And in the main zone of where he has tangentially injected gas, that is creating the charge separation with the ions, because it's going in a vortex. It will naturally do that, and that helps the overall process of aligning the matter. So it's not surprising. It would seem to work. Now, whether it can be made to work and overcome the problems that are there with the geek, with load matching and so forth, that remains to be seen. But even if it does burn fuel more efficiently, you get another 20% or 40% or whatever out of your fuel, then that literally doubles. You know, if you get 50% more efficiency out of the fuel you put in, you are literally adding 50% to the world's fuel reserves. It's monumental just adding efficiency. You don't have to be over unity. This is what I'm arguing with using the toroidal moment in industrial processes. If you can produce water gas without having to boil it, then, or you can dry food without having to, boil them. Firstly, you don't damage them so much, and secondly, you put in a lot less energy. This is, I believe, what's going on in the wind hex to a degree. And this is why I believe you need the wind hex to have some form of level of dynamic nature in there, such that it is able to produce charge separation and start producing the same kind of things that I'm talking about in this work here. Okay, so yeah, that's what I was saying. That. So Diodon Axe says, if you find iron in any of my samples, I would be baffled, to be honest. Yes. Okay. So, well, when we get a chance to look at those, I will take that on notice. Thank you. Carbon, the next order atomic ground state is what you're suggesting with oxygen. I should see if I can incorporate that software with an agent. Okay, I think I know what you're talking about using AI. Cosmic Dave, Bob, I will send you an email after this presentation. Very exciting. I'm looking forward to that, Cosmic Dave. Diodon Axe, understanding the science makes it even more magical. Yeah, it also means that you can start to act with confidence. And also less fear. Certainly these systems, like Shishkin was using the water from his cavitation device to feed plants and found that they grew faster. Well, first test I would do is boil it to make sure there was no nitrogen in there, so you can remove the question of nitrogen fixation, right, in the cavitator. If the plant still grew well, then it's not because of nitrogen. It's not because of nitrogen. So this is another test that can be done very, very easily with someone with a cavitator. Boil the water before you put it in, process it in the cavitator to be nowhere near the cavitator when it's running. You don't want to get those charge clusters in you, and you don't want the life force chi to be sucked out of you and assembled into that water that has dissolved oxygen in it. So when you boil it, you need to have, you need to re-oxygenate it. So I guess you could get something like, I don't know, potassium permanganate or something that would evolve oxygen, or electrolyze it so it's just got oxygen, electrolyze it in a vibrator, right? So you could do that. So you have no nitrogen in there, and then run it through the cavitator and apply that to the plants and see if they grow just as vigorously or more vigorously than with ordinary water. So, there are ways to test that part of the understanding. Yes, Corky, this is our birthright. And I think it's something that we've forgotten. As I said early in this process, I think in 2017, I think, how did we get so stupid? If you improve plant growth alone, you can increase the amount of food you produce. And so you can deal to a degree with poverty and hunger and malnutrition. Especially if you're creating, elements along the way to improve soils. Yeah, Cosmic Dave saying fluorine and chlorine can be evaporated off too if processed tap water. Yes, but I'm arguing you don't allow them to evaporate. You're just exposing the water to the sun. And in fact, what I would do actually is, before doing that, I would get a bottle, and I would maybe only fill it so that 80% full or 70% full, and I would vigorously shake it to try and get some oxygen into the water before, you go and sit it out in the sun. Okay, so bye-bye, Slobodan. I don't know whether I caught you before you went, but thanks for tuning in. I'm trying to catch up with your questions here, sorry. Well, Corky says, don't leech my chi, bro. Well, the thing is that you have this abundant continual flux that's raining down on us from the cosmos. So, yeah. Cosmic Dave, chi is the magic. Yes, that's true. 3, truth of the matter. Hello, 3. Yeah, Cosmic Dave, morphic fields, resonance. I would argue when enough people have enough common DNA, the information is put into the Akashic record, which I believe is in the coherent condensate Reliant neutrinos, that such that everyone with enough similar DNA start to automatically get the information, and it just happens. Everyone starts understanding stuff without being told. It's just science. It's not magic. It's just science. Wow. I don't know where I'm losing it. Right, I'm going to work from the bottom up now. It's probably going to be easy. Well, run a test and see if it works well without the fish. Okay, hundreds and hundreds of monkeys. Okay, have you looked at different forms or quaternion representations of the EM for some of the math? No, I started at this process by looking at what nature does in samples, and then that worked with what was found by Bokris, by Bostic and Nardi, and we've produced the structures, and just nature does this. It does it every time. I don't think any no maths was necessary to work this out. No maths at all. Just looking at what nature did. That's it. And just accepting that we're not the most intelligent people that have ever lived, and that there was something to be shared by ancient civilizations. They knew stuff. And it, just like in latter years, we found that Tesla had put that little Easter egg on his 1935 or whatever it was, weapon to end all wars, New York Times staged photo. I likewise, in my very first third of my slides from O-Day, included the symbol of supposedly a sun-worshipping cult that was, I think, 400 BC through to something like 600 AD, depending on whether you're looking in Italy or in northern England, where you had 4 yin-yangs around a central point. And that is, my friends, the wheel within a wheel within a wheel. I was signaling that this is fractal. I spoke about it in that presentation on October the 4th, 2018. And it's there. It's there in that pre-Christian symbology, supposedly of how the sun works. And I think they were right. Now, how did they know that? How did they work it out? Don't know. But they put it in stone and sent it forward. Hopefully, maybe someone would work it out. But it is what it is, in my view. No maths needed. None at all. You can work it all out by looking in someone's face and believing what nature is showing you back. any of those symbols in ancient sites like Göbekli Tepe, I don't know. But you see them everywhere. The double epsilon of Delphi, it's like that is the structure. That is the wheel of the wheel of the wheel, just represented in a different way. William Surio, hi Bob. Can geopolymer enough generate electricity? Not quite sure what your question is, but certainly piezo crystals can generate intense discharges under intense shock stress. They didn't know stuff they knew about themselves. That okay. Okay. Okay, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to look through the comments and see if there's anything I need to answer, and I will try and answer that in the blog during the week. I'm just going to do a quick recap of what we have talked about today. I won't go into the LENR in a can HHO because I don't think it's necessary. You can go and look at that presentation. I'd recommend the Russian one, the one that I gave to the Russian community, because it's more refined. But this was HHO, O-Day HHO, 10th of September 2023. And I'm saying that if we are to assume that the research in 1976 conducted in Japan, verified recently in 2021 in major journals funded by pretty much every major institute in the world, produced toroids from a single laser pulse into a nonlinear plasma where the magnetic fields at, say, 20 micron sized toroid were of the order of 1.36 thousand Teslas and charge separation of 3.6 trillion volts, that something that was resonantly built and had, so let's say if this was 20 microns across, you can see that this is only 5 microns and that this substructure here is 1/4 of 5 microns. And if the magnetic field goes up extremely intensely as the diameter shrinks, then you can imagine the magnetic fields in here are just absolutely phenomenal. And it relates through to the gravity azimuth and so forth. But magnetics is the key, in my view, when you are looking at HHO. And here is a self-organized structure that has a black hole in the middle. And here is one which has a black hole in the middle. It's self-organized because there was no man getting in the way of the black hole at the center of our galaxy forming. And this one is a colorized version of one of the subsections of this larger fractal torus. I talked about the work of George Ossawa, which was replicated by Sundaresan from Babur Atomic Research Center and John Bokris. And after doing this work, they found that they had produced iron. They say iron 56. It's interesting that they chose that. Did they know it was iron 56? Don't recall. Maybe they did in their paper. Maybe I should read it through fully, but I don't recall them observing helium-4, which is interesting. And, you know, if they found carbon, it wouldn't be a surprise because they're using carbon electrodes, right? So, like, you know, that wouldn't be an interesting thing for them to find. But when we are looking in our systems, we are definitely seeing carbon around these structures, including the iron-rich crenellated microspheres. So we have a better idea of what's going on. They use this oxygen-18, but I don't believe that's the case in this reaction because the carbon, I don't believe, once it's synthesized, it doesn't like to spend time in the structure. It goes to the outside because it is diamagnetic, and this structure is very, very, very intensely magnetic with a nonlinear fall-off and this double layer zone where outside the electromagnetics are cancelled to zero. And so, you know, there's a fuzzy zone and then there's a zero zone. Okay, so what is going on? Growth after a thunderstorm. Is it just the water and nitrogen fixation? I don't believe it is. I argued that it is because the discharges and the rainwater conspire to capture, synthesize and capture a lot of condensed chi, and that is carried to the ground in the water, and that goes into the plant through capillary and osmosis, and the plant absolutely loves it. It is the life force. And this is the analysis by Tokyo Institute of Technology, National University in Tokyo. And when you understand the aspects that we talk about later, you will understand why a Mars gas works. And then I focused on the magnetic moments of protons and neutrons. Protons being key here. We're talking about atomic hydrogen, and atomic hydrogen, it's slightly bigger than a free proton, but more importantly, it has in the lower energy state, in the s orbital, it actually is additive, and so the magnetic moment is aligned with the magnetic field it's in, so it builds the magnetic moment when it adds into a system. So we have 2.4 times bigger, and it strengthens the magnetic moment. In my view, I may be wrong, but this needs to be checked, but I think this is right. And in addition, it itself, atomic hydrogen, with its unpaired electron, is paramagnetic, which means it will have this magnetic property at any temperature. And it will be attracted to either a north charge or a south charge monopole. So it will align with the field structures in those. So it will help build a north monopole or a south monopole. Electrons are also paramagnetic. Okay, so H2, the hydrogen molecule with paired electrons, is diamagnetic. So you have to create either a free proton or ideally atomic hydrogen to enable the reaction, and this is expelled from a magnetic field. So H2 is not good. You need to do the dissociation, at least produce atomic hydrogen. Therefore, atomic hydrogen is critical for cluster formation, and we can see this almost instantly in Henk Uren's Vega experiments. You add the hydrogen into the residual air with the discharge, and boom, immediately these great balls of fire start forming. So oxygen now is uniquely paramagnetic. Oxygen atomic with its unpaired electron is just 658 times stronger than the free proton magnetic moment. O2 is 18,714 times stronger. So if anything's going to work, it's going to be O2. And O3 is just 351 times. So it's the worst of the bunch. So you definitely want O2, and the work of Leonid Ritskev shows that these structures are expelled at great velocity and leave the water in the exploding wire, and therefore you want to have your oxygen in the water. It's not necessarily sufficient to just have extra oxygen produced at the electrode. You need to continuously dissolve the oxygen into the water. And so the reaction we are looking at, therefore, revisiting Sundaresan and Bockris, in light of the apparently confirmed prediction of mine by Binger and Huang et al. At Taipei University Department of Energy. The atomic hydrogen, which has been put in long form here, the 1H1 being the proton, the electron, those two together are the atomic hydrogen, and the oxygen, you would have O2 and 2 atomic hydrogen going into a cluster that's able to cohere relic neutrinos either from the environment or from the initial proper charge separation of some atomic hydrogen, leading to the formation of 17 oxygen, and 2 of these 17 oxygens, which would occur, actually the whole thing would occur at the same time, leads to the production of carbon and neon. And because we don't see 21 and 20 neon and 20 and 21 neon, and this is the most likely reaction of these, and we do see carbon in all these experiments, then why would this thing not occur when you had more intense process going on? And so the proposal is that you actually have 4 17 oxygens simultaneously synthesized, and this leads to the production of 12C and 56 iron, and this effectively is the same energy level that was observed by Sundaresan and Bokras in their paper, which would account for the observed excess heat apparently. And so therefore this is too close to call. I therefore think, and it is my hypothesis, that if we test the crenellated microspheres in the either the ultra experiment or in the work by Henk Uren, we will see a higher concentration of iron 56 because it's synthesized by this, and it will actually explain the observations of George Osler, the property observations of his synthesized iron, which they showed was different in properties. And this might account for this column in India that doesn't seem to decay, because it might have been synthesized using this process and these kind of things. And to have iron that is more resistant to chemical erosion and so forth would be absolutely fantastic. To have iron that could be better at resisting even cavitation would be very, very significant in terms of massive implications for manufacturing of ships and pipes and everything in between. So yeah, we go to the iron here, and so we're looking for these crenellated iron microspheres to have a non-natural 56 iron ratio and possibly 0 iron 57. If that's the case, that might actually be easier to detect. But the beauty of having these very defined things that we can see, and we know that that is the thing that's been synthesized in the core of the ball lightning, then I would suspect that using some secondary iron mass spectrometry, we could work out whether we're seeing this or this not there. So that was O'Day HHO. Thank you very much for your time, and I will see you in the next video.